Come on, weatherman, give us a forecast, snowy white. Can't you hear the prayers of every childlike heart tonight? Rockies are calling, then we're snow falling. Somebody said it's 4 feet deep. It doesn't matter. Give me the laughter, I'm gonna choose to keep another tender Tennessee Christmas, the only Christmas for me, where the love circles around us like the gifts around our tree. Well, I know there's more snow up in Colorado than my roof will ever see, but a tender Tennessee Christmas is the only Christmas for me.
Every now and then I get a wandering urge to see maybe California, maybe tinsel towns for me.
There's a parade there, we'd have it made there, bring home a tan for New Year's Eve. Sure sounds exciting, awfully inviting, still I think I'm gonna keep another tender Tennessee Christmas, the only Christmas for me, where the love circles around us like the gifts around our tree. Well, they say in LA it's a warm holiday, it's the only place to be, but a tender Tennessee Christmas is the only Christmas for me. there's more snow up in Colorado than my roof will ever see. But a tender Tennessee Christmas is the only Christmas for me. A tender Tennessee Christmas is the only Christmas for me.
This morning's opening words are the lyrics of a song. This was a song that was popular in the 1970s, written by Helen Reddy, who passed away earlier this year. And I think most of you will of course recognize the lyrics. I am woman, hear me roar, in numbers too big to ignore, and I know too much to go back and pretend, 'cause I've heard it all before, and I've been down there on the floor. No one's ever going to keep me down again. Oh yes, I am wise, but it's wisdom born of pain. Yes, I've paid the price, but look how much I've gained. If I have to, I can do anything. I am strong, I am invincible, I am woman. You can bend but never break me, 'cause it only serves to make me more determined to achieve my final goal. And I come back even stronger, not a novice any longer, 'cause you've deepened the conviction in my soul. And yes, I am wise, but it's a wisdom born of pain. Yes, I've paid the price, but look how much I've gained. If I have to, I can do anything. I am strong, I am invincible. That's not the entire lyrics, but that's the first couple of verses in a chorus. Helen Reddy passed away earlier this year. So this is in honor of her and strong women everywhere.
Gloria in excelsis Deo, Gloria in excelsis Deo, Gloria in excelsis Deo, Gloria in excelsis Deo.
Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This is our great covenant.
Good morning. Let's discuss black suffragettes. Women's rights activists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Betsy Ross, who had championed gender equity, did not feel the same way about black women. While many white suffragettes did help to eradicate the institution of slavery, they did not work to ensure that former slaves could have citizenship and voting rights. In 1870, the suffragettes found themselves on opposing ends of the equal rights battle when Congress passed the 15th Amendment, enabling black men to vote, at least in theory, and not women. That measure engendered more resentment among some white suffragettes, especially the ones in the South. Black women were not accounted for in the white women's push for suffrage. White women were not fighting necessarily for equality of women. Instead, it was about white women having the same power as their husbands. So, our American history does not acknowledge the African American suffragettes as their white counterparts are acknowledged. Let me name a few and see how many you know and how they contributed to a movement that would not bear fruit for the true equality of African American women until the 1960s. Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Carol Lee Franklin Cook, Angelina Weld Grimke, Charlotta Lottie Rowland, Mary Ann Shadd Cary, Gertrude Bastille Mussel, Ida B. Wells, Mary Church Terrell, Anna Julia Cooper, Rosa Parks, Charlotte Van Teen Fortin, Harriet Fortin Purvis, Harriet Hattie Purvis, Sarah Raymond, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, Nanny Helen Burroughs, and Ella Baker. Those are some of the black women who were suffragettes who worked toward voter rights and also for equality of all women. So, take this information, do some research, and find out how and why and when women of color contributed to the movement that women have today.
As we go marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 mill-lofts gray, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we come marching, marching, we battle too for men, for they are in the struggle, and together we shall win. Our days shall not be sweated, from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we come marching, marching, unnumbered women dead go crying through our singing their ancient call for bread. Small art and love and beauty, their trudging spirits new. Yes, it is bread we fight for, but we fight for roses. we're standing proud and tall. The rising of the women means the rising of us all. No more the drudge and idler, tend that toil where one reposes, but a sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses. Our lives shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses.
The story I have to share with you today is adapted from one called Lillian's Right to Vote by Jonah Winter and Shane W. Evans, and it is a story inspired by the story of a real woman named Lillian Allen, who lived in Pittsburgh and voted for the first African-American president at the age of 100 in 2008. And so it begins as she stands at the bottom of a very steep hill. It is voting day. She's an American and she is going to vote. But it is a long haul up that hill. It's a long haul when you've been alive for 100 years and when you've lived the life that Lillian has and walked so far in her shoes. And you know, when Lillian looks up, she sees more than the blue sky. She sees history. She sees her great-great-grandparents, Elijah and Sarah, and they are standing side by side on an auction block. And Sarah is holding their baby, Edmund. They are being sold as slaves in front of the same Alabama courthouse where rich white men and no one else are allowed to vote. Lillian starts her slow climb up the hill. And though the sun shines brightly that day, Lillian sees a dark time from years past. Now she sees her great-grandpa Edmund, now all grown up, and he is owned by another man, forced to pick cotton from daybreak to nightfall, right here in this country where it is written that all men are created equal. He sure doesn't have the right to vote. In fact, he doesn't have the right to do much at all until after the Civil War, which will end slavery. And as Lillian inches up the hill, she sees her great-grandpa Edmund on his way to vote for the first time, thanks to a law that was passed in 1870. And that law is the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which says that American citizens' right to vote shall not be denied or abridged on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Even though the law does not allow women to vote, Great-Grandma Ida is with her husband, and Lillian feels their dignity and their pride as they enter that courthouse for the first time. But as Lillian continues and the hill gets steeper, my, but that hill is steep. Have you ever climbed up a really steep hill? She sees what happens just 20 years later, right here in Alabama, where she is. There's her grandpa Isaac at the courthouse being charged a poll tax to vote, a tax that he doesn't have the money to pay. So much for that 15th Amendment. So much for Grandpa Isaac's right to vote. Now Lillian pauses to catch her breath, and she hears now the voice of her uncle Levi, telling her about the tests he was forced to take when he tried to vote, and about the sneer on the registrar's face as he asked, "How many bubbles are in a bar of soap?" Her uncle's lips go tight as he recalls being asked to name all 67 judges in the state of Alabama, and then being turned away and not allowed to vote when he failed to answer questions like that. And as Lillian pushes on, now struggling to keep her balance, she sees a brave girl standing next to her mother and father as they try to register to vote. And now the year is 1920. And the 19th Amendment has just passed, a law allowing women to vote. And the girl is Lillian herself with her mama and her papa. But they are being chased away by an angry mob. And there she sees Mr. Bentley, the barber, and Mr. McCrory, who owns the ice cream shop, and she feels the firm grip of her mother's hand as they run through the streets back home. Lillian stops in her tracks, unable to keep going. And as she stands there, she sees herself trying to register to vote for the very first time. She sees the blank piece of paper on which she must write down a section of the U.S. Constitution, word for word, as it is being mumbled by the registrar, a test that she could not pass. No one could. Now, looking at the top of the hill, Lillian wonders how she'll ever make it. It looks so far, and she is so tired. But though her legs and feet ache with 100 years of walking, what fuels her body is seeing 600 people beginning a peaceful protest march from Selma to Montgomery. People who, though they don't know it yet, will be stopped on a bridge in Selma by policemen with clubs. All they want is justice and the right to vote. And at the front is future Congressman John Lewis, whose forehead will always bear the scar from where he was beaten. As long as Lillian still has a pulse, she is going to vote, and so she keeps on climbing and keeps on seeing. This time the second march from Selma. This march also ends on the bridge in a prayer led by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., whose dreams of justice for African Americans is already famous at this point. Wherever he went, he lifted people up with his words, and his words still lift up Lillian, who, now seeing the top of the hill, is not about to stop, and footstep by footstep, she keeps on going. And as she takes those final steps to the top of the hill, Lillian can hear the voice of President Lyndon Johnson on her TV saying these words to America. Every American citizen must have an equal right to vote. There is no duty which weighs more heavily on us than the duty we have to ensure that right. All of us must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice, and we shall overcome. Before Lillian walks through the doors of the building where you better believe she will vote, she looks up and she sees the same blue sky, brighter than any sky she's ever seen, that she saw on August 6th, 1965. And that was the day when President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, the one law protecting all Americans' right to vote. In every state and every town, the one law protecting Lillian as a full-fledged citizen of the United States. And so she enters the building. And as Lillian steps into the voting booth once again, she sees herself stepping into the voting booth in 1965 for the very first time. And she knows full well she would not be standing here today were it not for the people who marched and the people who died for her right to vote. And Lillian touches her finger to the lever. And because she is a citizen of the United States of America, protected by the Voting Rights Act, Lillian pushes that lever. Lillian votes. She votes in 2008 at 100 years old. And of course now in 2020 we know that voting rights still need protecting, and that some parts of that Voting Rights Act have been struck down since then. And voting has become more difficult in some ways, intentionally so. And so we wonder, will we be the next generation to step up and continue the fight?
Joy, good morning. As we contemplate the fact that we survived Christmas and heading toward New Year's, we have the opportunity to reflect on the people who have been sick, ill, and who have passed from this plane of existence. Let us remember them, let us remember the past year and put it in the past and go forward. Remember the strength and the desires and the fight that people have brought to bring justice, freedom to this world. Join me in prayer as we contemplate the three figurines praying. We come into this world and we hope that we will do good. We come into this world believing in good. We come into this world so that we can be good. Good means making sure that we always show the love in our hearts, the love in our minds, and the love in our spirits. Help us to keep that flame burning, and when it becomes an ember, to look for ways to increase its light, to increase its power, and to increase the belief that we are all one. We're all children of God. Amen.
O little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie. Above thy deep and dreamless sleep, the silent stars go by. Yet in thy dark streets shineth the everlasting light. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight. For Christ is born of Mary and gathered all above. While mortals weep, the angels keep their watch of wondering love. O morning stars together proclaim the holy birth. Let praises ring from God they bring, goodwill to all on earth. How silently the wonder is made known, when God imparts to human hearts the gift that is our own. No ear may hear that coming, but in this worldly din, when souls are truly humble, then the dear babe rests within.
Good morning. Welcome to TVUUC. My name is Claudia Presley, and I'm the Director of Administration. Today is a Generosity Sunday. That means that all contributions that come in that are not marked as a pledge go to the General Operating Fund of TVUUC. The way you can give is to go to tvuuc.org/give, or you can text give to the number 73256, type in TVUUC and the amount that you would like to give. Once again, thanks for joining us and have a blessed day.
I can see clearly now, the rain is gone. I can see all obstacles in my way. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. It's gonna be a bright, sunshiny day. I think I can make it now, the pain is gone. All of the bad feelings have disappeared. Here is that rainbow I've been praying for. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. Look all around, there's nothing but blue skies. Look straight ahead, nothing but blue skies. I can see clearly now, the rain is gone. I can see all obstacles in my way. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day.
Good morning. This is the third installment of my women's suffrage trilogy. It has been a joy and an honor to speak to the congregation on the final Sunday of the year for the past 2 years and again this Sunday. Obviously, today is a little different, to say the least. Rather than joining you in the sanctuary of Tennessee Valley Unitarian Universalist Church, I have recorded my message and you are watching it online. While I have your attention, I want to take this opportunity to thank all of the members and friends of TVUC for your patience and understanding over the past months. It has been and continues to be a trying time in so many ways. We have all chosen to cancel or postpone multiple in-person gatherings, both with family and friends. A few months ago, most of us had never heard of Zoom, and now many of us are attending online meetings of various sorts on a weekly, if not daily, basis. It's not the same as being in the same space at the same time, and we're being mindful and taking the recommended measures that we hope will keep ourselves and others safe and healthy. Speaking for myself, I'm willing to do whatever is necessary to protect myself and others. 2020 will be known as the year of the pandemic. The presence of the COVID-19 virus and the threat of a serious illness associated with it has altered our lives in ways we could never have imagined at the beginning of the year. I'm hoping, along with all of you, that the new year will mark the beginning of the end for this epidemic, both here and abroad. I don't claim to know what the new normal will look like, but I am optimistic that we will all be together and to be able to gather together in our sacred space at some point during the coming year. Only time will tell when our hopes will be realized. I know we are eager to see everyone in person again so we can hug one another and have Sunday morning coffee together once again. In the meantime, we will continue to take appropriate measures in order to stay safe while helping each other cope with our current situation. Thank you again, one and all, for your patience during these strange days. And now I want to speak for a few minutes about the roles that women have played in the electoral process over the past 100 years. In the past, I've primarily focused on events that occurred in 1918 and 1919. Those were the years when the women's suffrage movement realized their goal of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. People all over the country celebrated the centennial of the ratification and passage of the 19th Amendment. I'm going to talk about some of those events later this morning. First, however, I want to talk about more recent events. The outcome of the recent presidential election was in large part due to women voters. In some cases, these were women who, along with others, stood in line for up to 8 hours and longer in order to get the opportunity to cast their ballots. As most, if not all of you know, women were a large part for the reason for the successful campaign of President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. Some would say women were the most important reason for that success. According to one news source, 58% of the women who voted cast their ballot for the Biden-Harris ticket. It appears that in several of the so-called battleground states, women were instrumental in getting out the vote for the Biden-Harris ticket. For example, in Arizona, which was considered a swing state, Biden won the women's vote. The upper Midwest states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota went for Biden and Harris. Catherine Pearson, a political science professor at the University of Minnesota, has argued that women, especially African American women, were critical to the Biden-Harris carrying those states. And how about Biden's win in Georgia? Who saw that coming? Stacey Abrams, that's who. I mentioned Ms. Abrams by name, but she is only one of the many women whose tireless efforts helped to cement the Democratic ticket's win. Obviously, the list of activists and organizers who made a difference is much too long to recount this morning. I suppose my point is that the historical political victory is the result of the efforts of thousands of women who decided to get involved to a greater extent than ever before. From phone banking to postcard writing to door-to-door canvassing, an army of women gave up their time, talent, and treasure to change the course of history. 2 years ago, I said that women would save us. I believe I actually got that prediction right. Back in 1920, people in the United States were also coping with a widespread viral epidemic. Hundreds of thousands of Americans had passed away due to viral infection. The virus was called the Spanish flu. By 1920, people around the world had been dealing with the pandemic for the better part of 2 years. People were urged to wear a face covering, and while many people followed those directives, there were some who chose not to comply. The mask controversy of 1918 through 1920 inspired a Red Cross public service announcement that bluntly stated, "The man or woman or child who will not wear a mask now is a dangerous slacker." Sound familiar? 1920 was also a presidential election year in the United States. It was the first such election after the enactment of the 19th Amendment. The ratification and subsequent passage of the 19th Amendment were pivotal elements of the suffrage movement that would lead to increased participation by women voters in the electoral process. By the time the amendment became law, women's suffrage organizations had been working for 7 decades to secure the vote for women. However, passage of the 19th Amendment was only one event on the road to realizing the goal of voting rights for everyone. The citizens of 1920 had no way of knowing that full voting rights were still many more decades away. Even now, there are concerted efforts to deny large segments of the American population the right to vote. I don't believe it's an exaggeration to say that we're currently witnessing a struggle for the cultural heart and soul of America. The lofty ideals set forth in the Declaration of Independence have yet to be fully realized. The notion that governments derive, and I quote, "their just powers from the consent of the governed," is currently being tested in ways and to degrees that may well be unprecedented. Almost 4 years ago, tens of thousands of people participated in women's marches in cities and towns all across the country. That spirit and energy has continued to inspire initiatives aimed at ensuring that every American citizen who chooses to vote can do so, and that every vote is counted. The struggle continues. During the first 20 years of the 20th century, the states managed their own elections just as they do today. And then, as today, voter oppression efforts were widespread. Even after the passage of the 19th Amendment, election officials found ways to make registering to vote difficult for women. Women and men of color were largely excluded from the electoral process altogether. African Americans, as well as members of other minority groups who attempted to become registered voters, were often met with strong opposition that included multiple tests intended to prevent successful voter registration. When those more subtle means were ineffective, violence was used as a means of oppression. That situation was to be partially corrected by the civil rights legislation of the mid-1960s, but only partially. Legislation alone, no matter how noble the intent, is not sufficient to alter people's attitudes. The attitudes that are at the center of voter suppression efforts are often handed down from generation to generation, and in many cases are extremely resistant to change. If the past 4 years have taught us nothing else, they have demonstrated that deep-seated prejudices are still widespread across our nation. Those of us who strive to see the inherent worth and the dignity of every person may find it difficult, if not downright impossible, to understand what motivates others to discriminate against our fellow citizens. Even as we attempt to find compassion for those who would relegate members of some groups to second-class status, we will never accept their behavior as moral or ethical. As the saying goes, the struggle continues. We are approaching a new year. The new year will bring with it a new presidential administration. This new administration will be historic. For the first time in the history of the Republic, we will have a woman as vice president, and that woman is a person of color. Kamala Harris is a very real symbol of the increasing participation of women in our democracy. The rise to political power of a greater number of women is the culmination of 170 years of fighting for the right to be heard and the right to have a seat at the table. I'll say it again. Women will save us. Thank you for your time. Namaste.
Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. Where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There will be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land where I'm bound. There will be freedom in that land. There will be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound. Where I'm bound. There will be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound. Where I'm bound. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing.
Many of you are aware of the story of Harry Byrne of Nyota, who in 1919 was in the Tennessee legislature. The ratification process was at a point where one more state was required before the amendment could be enacted into law. There were 48 states then, and there was, so 36 was the magic number. Three-fourths of the states were required to ratify. So there were 35 states that had ratified. One more was needed. The suffragists were kind of running out of hope because Tennessee was going to be really close. So Harry Byrne, who was thought to be in the opposition camp, and quite frankly probably was, received a letter from his mother. And it read in part, on page 2, for example, Mrs. Byrne, her name was Feb, by the way. Mrs. Byrne wrote, "Hurrah and vote for suffrage, and don't keep them in doubt." And on page 4, "I hope you see enough of politicians to know it's not one of the greatest things to be one. What say ye?" And then on page 6, she wrote, "Don't forget to be a good boy and help Mrs. Thomas Cat," that was Carrie Cat, "with her rats. Is she the one that put rat in ratification? Ha! No more from Mama this time, with lots of love." Well, apparently that did the trick, because when they called out Harry Byrne's name, he voted in favor of ratification. And his was the vote that was needed to ratify the 19th Amendment in the Tennessee legislature, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Let people living in all lands declare that fear and pain are gone. Rise above differences and stand in love and understanding one.
As your last act of worship, I invite you to go and greet your neighbor, safely and at a distance, of course. Go in peace.
I can see clearly now the rain is gone. I can see all obstacles in my way. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day.